Oh, that's cool. And there's overlapping sometimes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Katz. I'm the director of the Global Health Institute here. And I just wanted to thank all of you for coming today for a nice turnout for Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne. We've only just met, so I'll get his name by the end of this. But he is going to be talking today about peace, grassroots empowerment, and sustainable development. And the Global Health Institute is really proud to host Dr. Ariyaratne as one of our visiting scholars. We have a Visiting Scholars Award, and Vinya was one of our distinguished scholars to make it to the United States under our sponsorship. He leads the largest grassroots development organization in Sri Lanka, acting as General Secretary of the Sarvayadesh. Right up here. He's the General Secretary of that organization, which you'll hear more about later. He is a physician and facilitator, a teacher, a peace builder, a conflict resolution expert, and expert in reconciliation. He obtained his MD in Sri Lanka from the De La Salle University, actually in the Philippines, sorry. And he got his MPH from Johns Hopkins University, and we missed each other by 1 year. He is, in addition to working with children affected by war and conflict, he's coordinated this humanitarian relief effort after the tsunami. And he assisted the United Nations, Sri Lanka Health Ministry, and other relief organizations in serving thousands of displaced persons after that disaster. So I will hand this over to Vinya to present today, and again, thank you for coming to hear him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that kind introduction. It's pronounced Sarvodaya Shramadana. I'll explain the words to you later. I'm deeply honored to be invited by the Global Health Institute as a visiting scholar. And what I'm going to share with you is my experience with the Sarvodaya movement in Sri Lanka. And when I was given this topic, I mean, you can discuss anything under the sun in this topic, sustainable development, empowerment, and peace. So I have tried to prepare a presentation which will introduce the work that we are doing in Sri Lanka, and also touch on some of the important activities that we are doing at the moment and their connection to a globalized world. So I'll start with the very basics, because I think some of you may not know much about Sri Lanka. So so Sri Lanka is a small country. It's an island nation in the Indian Ocean, located in the southern tip of India. We have a small population compared to our neighboring countries, 21 million people. Therefore, being a small country with a small population, we also have a bit of a high population density. Sri Lanka is a very multi-ethnic and multi-religious country. The very reason why it gave rise to a very violent conflict which lasted for more than 26 years. So we have a majority who belong to the ethnic group Sinhalese, and we have Sri Lankan Tamils, and also another ethnic, distinctly ethnic community called the Indian Tamils, who came to Sri Lanka several centuries ago under the British rule, because Sri Lanka was colonized by three Western nations, Portuguese, Dutch, and the British. Only British could colonize Sri Lanka the whole of Sri Lanka and ruled for more than 300 years. And during the British time, they introduced plantation crops, mainly tea. You drink Ceylon tea, and Ceylon tea was introduced during British time, and they brought down Indian labor from the southern part of India. So the Indian Tamils came, they are of recent origin in Sri Lanka. Then we have the Moors, who are Muslims, who were traders, who came to Sri Lanka over centuries, so they also are a distinct ethnic community. Then also descendants from the Dutch, who colonized Sri Lanka about 4 centuries ago. So we have a very multi-ethnic society, and it is a very rich society in terms of culture and tradition. Then in terms of religion, the majority are Buddhists. We follow the Theravada Buddhism, like many other Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, and so on. Then the large majority of the Tamils are Hindu. Then we have Muslims also, 9.7%. Then we have Christians who belong to both ethnic communities, Sinhalese and the Tamils, who comprise about 6.1%, and other Christians 1.3%. So it's again, Sri Lanka has a very rich diversity when it comes to religion as well. In terms of social statistics, though we have had a war for more than 26 years, because of the policies that we followed since independence in 1948, we have achieved a very satisfactory state of health as well as social well-being. If you look at the conventional statistics, our life expectancy at birth is very high, and also infant mortality rate is low, literacy is very high. But these are averages, like any average, when you take national averages, it really deceives, and it just masks the disparities that are there. So if you look at the same indicators at the district level or at the community level, you really see vast disparities. So we get areas where you will have 2 times the national average for infant mortality, for example. So the disparities are very high, and we are now considered a middle income country. We are not a poor country anymore, because our per capita income is $3,280. So even though we have widespread poverty, particularly in areas which were affected by the war, we are considered a middle income country. Therefore, we are not eligible for the kinds of grants that we used to get 20-30 years ago. So especially civil society organizations like Sarvodaya, which I represent, do not get the same kind of assistance that we used to get to serve these underserved communities in Sri Lanka. So just to put in context the work that we do in relation to the conventional definitions of sustainable development, just to remind ourselves, the classical definition is we try to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So this is the classical definition. But in Sarvodaya, our movement, which was inspired by Buddhist and Gandhian thinking, even though we are a very secular organization serving all communities in Sri Lanka, we look at development in a different way. Is development economic growth, or is it satisfaction of basic needs, or is it something much more broader, which we may call well-being, or is it also related to freedom, security? So I think there is a ongoing debate on what real development is all about. So the recent concepts of human development as measured by life expectancy, literacy, and access to basic services, literacy, so on. I mean, these things are still there, but we would like to look at development in a much broader way, and that is how we have defined development in our movement and tried over 5 decades now to tread a path of development which was not conventional. So our approach is that we try to recognize development as a process where we recognize the interconnectedness of all beings and all systems, and also there are multiple determinants of poverty. Of course, we all know that's a fact, that poverty is an outcome, of not just economic factors but also social, cultural and even spiritual determinants. So development is an outcome as well as a process, and we take a holistic view of well-being, both psychological as well as physical. So in our movement, we try to define development as an awakening process that takes place at the level of the individual, starting with the individual to the whole world, and also covering 6 dimensions, that is spiritual, moral, cultural, social, economic and political. I will in a minute explain to you how we have translated this broad philosophy into specific action. Now the word Sarvodaya means awakening of all. It's a Sanskrit word, you know the root language in South Asia is Sanskrit and also Pali. So it's a word which has roots in 2 words, Sarva or all, Udaya is awakening. And Shramadana is sharing of your labor, but we have given it a broader meaning. Shrama means labor, sharing is dana, but sharing your time, thoughts and energy for the well-being of others. So this was the philosophical basis on which our movement operated for more than 50 years. And this process of awakening, the development process, has to start with the individual. What can I do to awaken myself in those 6 dimensions? What can my family do to awaken ourselves? So development was an integral part of a much broader process taking place in your community, in urban communities and in the country as a whole and in the world at large. That is why we have programs which are happening at the grassroots, very grassroots level, to programs where we have a lot of exchanges. Now we are hosting for the last 4 years a group of students from University of Wisconsin, medical students and also students from the Global Health Institute to experience this development at grassroots level for 2 weeks. And it's a very rewarding experience, not just for the students but also for the communities who host, because we are all interconnected, and in this globalized world I think we need to have a much broader understanding, and I think that those are the values on which the Global Health Institute has been founded. So it was very inspiring for me to read the profile of the Global Health Institute, where Jonathan says that we look at not just the economic and other or biological determinants of ill health or well-being, but we look at social and economic and cultural determinants as well. So we share that vision and the philosophy. So in terms of development, we are trying to alleviate or eradicate poverty. But poverty goes hand in hand with powerlessness, disempowerment. So from the very beginning of our movement in the 1950s, we worked with communities which were not just poor in terms of their economic status, but also who felt that they were really not part of the mainstream. Therefore, they felt disempowered or powerless. So our movement tried to adopt a very simple philosophy. That is, you can do something to change your own situation. As a country which was emerging out of a 400-year-old colonial rule, people had a mentality that everything has to be delivered by the government. Basic services has to come from the government. So although traditionally people have been helping each other and also having really self-sufficient economies in their villages due to colonial rule, where a different type of economy was introduced instead of subsistence economy based on agriculture, self-sustaining economy, replaced by an export-oriented economy of tea, rubber and coconut. So the whole village life also got affected. So therefore people at the time of our independence in the late 1940s were used to really waiting for government to deliver services. Of course, on the positive side, government policies such as free education, free healthcare really provided opportunity for people to climb up in the social ladder, and also as a result we achieved these very impressive levels of literacy and health status. But by and large, people couldn't meet their basic needs. Poverty was very high, more than 60% at the time when our movement was started. So we were educating the communities. You can do something on their own with your own resources to change the situation, and then supported these communities in various ways in terms of guiding them through training, education, and also certain techniques, and later on through financial support received from various donor organizations. So from 1958, this movement came a long way, starting with one community. Now we have reached about 15,000 villages in Sri Lanka. That doesn't mean that all these 15,000 villages have reached a level of development. No, they have initiated the process where at some point they'll be able to look after themselves. So we are by far the largest civil society organization in Sri Lanka with this distinct philosophy, and we intend to continue this path of development, although our strategies have evolved because Sri Lanka is now a middle income country, and also the state or the government is in a better position to deliver some of the services that we used to deliver earlier to rural communities. We don't have the same resources because the donor funding is also not there. We are now adopting a different methodology where we try to empower the communities themselves to be able to access the government services rather than we providing those services directly to them. So that change has taken place during the last 5 to 10 years. And because I would like to touch a little bit more on the philosophical side of our movement and how these individuals are connected, because our movement is still by and large a voluntary organization. We have thousands and thousands of volunteers. Some are part-time, some are full-time, but we have a full-time staff of about 600 workers in the main organization. And this process of awakening, the development process, starts with the personality, and we use these 4 principles that are found in Buddhism, metta or loving kindness, and translate that thought into action we call karuna or compassionate action. And when your action brings in results, when you see some positive impact in your community, you get a joy, and you call it mudita or altruistic joy. And then as an individual you should develop this quality of upekka or equanimity, because when we go through a process of transformation in a community, we are an organization aiming for social transformation, and social transformation starts from your own transformation, and it's a difficult path. Not always people will support you. There are many obstacles on the way. Our movement over the period of 55 years faced enormous problems, not just the war that have intervened in between, but also various political parties tried to obstruct the work that we were doing, but so we had to be very resilient. So as individuals we need to develop that sense of equanimity or the quality of equanimity, so that we don't get disturbed when we are praised for the work that we do. We are not getting discouraged when we are blamed for what we are doing. So that is a very important quality that we try to inculcate in each and every individual who works for our movement. Now that's an individual level. Then at the community level, we try to promote these qualities of sharing, dana. So sharing whatever you can. Sometimes it's only your labor to construct a road or construct a preschool or some other facility that will benefit the community. Then in the process you try to relate to each other as human beings in a respectful manner. So pleasant language. Now here it's not just the language of communication, but you know how you relate to each other, and what you talk with each other has some meaning, and it will lead to again contribute to this transformation process. And all action needs to be meaningful action. And finally, we have to have equality. So these are the qualities that we would like to promote in a community that will lead to community awakening. So individual awakening to community awakening. So with this philosophy, in the first 10 years of the movement, these volunteers went from village to village and in the 50s and 60s, it was mainly concentrated on building roads. So the movement was known as a road building movement, but there was a real deeper meaning, and that meaning is reflected in this saying that we used to have: we build the road builds us. Because in the process of building the road, you build your own personality and you relate to each other and understand each other and really lay the foundation for much more specific concrete work in the community, which I am going to explain in a little while. So this process led to us defining a development model, a very practical development model, a 5-stage village development model, which is now practiced in all the villages, all the communities that we work. And these villages that we work, 15,000 villages, they are different stages of development. So what is stage 1? Now this model evolved out of practice rather than we starting with this theoretical framework. We believe that this social transformation process or empowerment process has to start with the human mind. So those qualities that I was describing earlier has to happen at an individual level. Therefore, we try to make a change in our mindset, particularly in the communities, that we can really do something to change our situation. That is very important. And we have a lot of education programs, we have material developed, and if you go to a village, you will see how certain community mobilizers who have been trained on specific skills of community for mobilization use these techniques to bring communities psychologically into this process. Then that itself will lead to what we call social infrastructure building. Now this is happening before any physical infrastructure building happens in a village to fulfill the basic needs of a community. So social infrastructure is that you try to organize the community in groups of children, groups of youth, groups of farmers, groups of elders, and so on. So this group formation is very important, because then they are able to identify the problems that are much more particular to that group, and they can really then see how they can collectively plan to address those issues. Then the third stage is that they have to have a formal structure, a community organization that will take the lead in mapping out the problems in the village, and there are resources in the village in a very scientific way, and there are many techniques that we all use in sociology and so many other disciplines to map out what is available, what needs to be done, but based on that philosophical framework, looking at development as a holistic process. It's not just about building toilets and houses and so on, but really building the community as a whole in a culturally appropriate way, bringing out the human values and so on. So the satisfaction of basic human needs, we have identified 10 basic human needs that need to be satisfied in each and every village. When a community organization, a formal organization with a simple constitution, where there's a membership which is drawn from the village, elected members, key office bearers who are from the community itself, and we guide in the process, give them training, give them guidance, how to open a bank account, how to enter into simple transactions. Then only we start economic programs in the form of savings and credit and enterprise development. The economic programs start only when the social foundation is firmly laid. Now this is a difference between our movement and other organizations who straight away start with economic or microfinance programs. We don't do that. We first lay this foundation, and you may ask how long it will take. Usually 6 months to 3 years will take for us to really build a very strong organization. But of course sometimes they move along this path, and then sometimes the leadership changes, and then they revert back to the lower stages. But by and large, we have had more than 70-80% success rate of graduation by these communities. Then finally, we would like these villages to be totally self-reliant. So we have followed this path, and out of these 15,000 villages, 5,400 villages have been now registered as community organizations, and out of that about 3,000 are really now self-reliant and functioning. And when we host students from UW, they go to some of these villages and they see how the preschools are run, how nutrition programs are run, how microfinance programs are run, and they are connected to our organization. Philosophically, we have no control over these organizations. So they are independent, a network of independent organizations connected with a common philosophy based on sharing and all the other principles that we follow, and we guide them through a network of district centers, because they need a support network. Otherwise, these communities which not on their own cannot function. So we have a physical presence in all the districts in Sri Lanka, and we have training centers where training is provided. Earlier, we used to get a lot of assistance from donor organizations to conduct various types of trainings. Now we have to rely on our own resources. We have a few income generation activities that support our programs, but still we are dependent on donor funding. But very fast donor funding is drying up, so we are actually starting our own enterprises, and we are in a real transition at this stage, at this moment when I make this presentation to you. So we have, in addition to district centers, specialized development education institutes and multi-purpose centers and certain farms where we give specialized training in say organic agriculture, sustainable agriculture and so on. Then over the years we have started independent legal organizations. Some programs which became big, they were converted into separate legal entities with separate boards but connected to the larger Sarvodaya movement. So at the moment we have 12 legal independent or national organizations specializing in women development, legal aid, welfare, looking after abandoned and orphan children, disabled and so on. So we have 12 national organizations working in a coordinated manner. So these are the 10 basic human needs that we try to satisfy through community action and local resources. Beautiful environment is, clean and beautiful environment is one of the prime needs that we have identified. Water, sanitation, clothing, nutrition, housing, healthcare, basic communication and so on. So I'll not go into details, but we are trying to the extent possible through community action, we try to satisfy these community needs. And now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we were getting external support to satisfy these needs in number of communities in the form of grants from large grants from bilateral organizations and also multilateral organizations. But now we are trying to connect the state services, because now our government is also richer than what it used to be 20 years ago. So now let them deliver. Earlier, the state wasn't, government wasn't that rich. Now this is the basic introduction to the movement. I like to now present to you the reality. You all know we have had a very bloody war in Sri Lanka. I will not go into the details of why the war happened and so on, but we had a violent phase of a conflict which started in the 1980s, but after the roots of conflict go back to probably centuries, and also the way history is interpreted. And in my lecture this morning I tried to trace the different determinants that led to this violent conflict in Sri Lanka, where I mentioned that all communities have a certain identity. Sometimes it's deeper in our psychology, our consciousness. And if you look at some of the protracted conflicts, whether it's Northern Ireland or Palestine, Israel, how history is interpreted, who came to the land first, and all these are factors. But how do you try to relate all these historical narratives into present day reality and try to live as, live in harmony, sharing the limited resources we have. So since 1983 till 2009 May, we had a very violent war it is a separatist war. The separatist group Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam got themselves organized into a very effective guerrilla organization with a very sophisticated international network. And finally, the government, and in between, we had different phases of there were ceasefires in between, and the longest lasting ceasefire was from 2001 to 2006. But there was a government change in 2005, and after a brief spell of peace talks, this government decided that they will try to eliminate the militant group through military means, and they succeeded. Although the cost of the war was very high, and there are unanswered questions with regard to the last phase of the war, as well as atrocities allegedly committed by both sides. There is an investigation. UN Human Rights Council has initiated an investigation. So Sri Lanka is in a very sort of complex situation as a nation now, because of the context in which these things are happening now. But as ordinary people living in our country, we have to deal with the aftermath of the war, and we are trying to somehow now recover from the war. And as a national organization, we are very much involved in the reconciliation and rebuilding of communities, those who were affected by the war. So more than probably somewhere between 60 to 100,000 people have been killed, and a large number of service personnel belonging to the Army, Navy and the Air Force and police got killed. At the same time, our own young people, 27,000 militants who belong to the Tamil community, who are also citizens and who are sons and daughters of our country, got killed. And there were about 12,000 cadres who were surrendered, and we also had a large number of child combatants, underage combatants, child soldiers. Very unfortunate, some of them were recruited when they were just 10, 11, 12, and even though they were surrendered and they went through a rehabilitation process, the aftermath of, the impact, the trauma, and also reintegration of these ex-combatants is a very difficult task, and we are also helping in that reintegration process. There was a tremendous impact on the economy, particularly in the north and the east of the country, where the war had its biggest impact, destroyed livelihoods. So the other important factor is that the war in Sri Lanka came to an end through military means, not through negotiations like in Northern Ireland or South Africa. So there is a sense of defeat by the Tamil community, and also some elements of the Sinhalese community who believe that it was a victory against terrorism, and so there is like a sense of undue sense of celebration, which also hurt the Tamil community. So it's a very complex situation where we are in now. And what is also important is that although the war has come to an end, the conflict has not come to an end. So we are a post-war country, we are not a post-conflict country, because the root causes that led to the war have still not been addressed by the stakeholders, the parties to the conflict. So I would like to now shift to the economic side of our work, and I like to touch on this and then conclude and have no time for discussion. Because we were looking at sustainable development, we believe that the current economic model is not serving the interests of our communities, particularly the disadvantaged communities in the country. The economic model is based on profit generation and not on human welfare, and some of these things are not, you all know already. And it is based on the survival of the fittest approach. We see it when you look at the inequities and unequal income distribution that we see in indicators, and also the international interventions and corporates, how they are having an impact. Just last week we had a very big convention where celebrated figures like Dr. Vandana Shiva from India, who is fighting in India to preserve indigenous varieties of seeds. It's a big battle. Now, we have had, those of you who have been to Sri Lanka, see the different types of fruits we have. We have banana varieties, indigenous, more than 30 varieties. Mangoes, again, 30, 40 varieties. Now, papaya. We have papaya seeds which are distributed. When you grow, you take the fruit, but there are no seeds inside. So these are all multinational companies replacing all these indigenous varieties, and it's a terrible situation. The farmers are in debt, and so we have seen this disempowerment of communities through this present economic model. So it is based on paper money and based on credit or loans. So we would like to see a different economic model, and again we try to derive inspiration from the Buddhist philosophy of income distribution. Buddha said that you try to use only one portion of your income for consumption. From your salary, you divide it into 4 portions. Only one portion you should use for your consumption. 2 portions you should invest in something that will give you a return. But again, it has to be an ethical investment. You shouldn't invest it in a distillery company or alcohol producing company or arms production company. And one portion you should keep for an emergency. So it's a very basic philosophy of economics. So in our alternative economic approach, we try to, as I described earlier, to satisfy basic needs. So economic system should satisfy basic needs, not greed, basic needs. And use of renewable resources. To the extent possible, we have promoted solar technology, use of micro hydro in villages, and also biogas. So we have promoted from the very early days of our movement alternative energy sources. Then people-based approach. Always, if we put the people at the center, then I think we always come up with a different model. And gender equality, we all know women share a very disproportionate burden when it comes to everything. Even the war had a tremendous negative impact on women in Sri Lanka. We have more than 90,000 widows in our country. I mean, it's unbelievable. And from both sides, from families belonging to government service personnel to ex-combatants of the LPT. And so gender issues are much more relevant now, and we try to look at a self-sufficient economy, not a dependent economy, although we are interdependent and we know that we are in a globalized world, but we can still achieve self-sufficiency. And the approach has to be bottom-up, and sharing and caring. An economy should be taking care of the disadvantaged people. And the role of the state has to be defined well. We always leave the private sector to drive everything, and that economic model has not worked in our countries. Then use of appropriate technology, including information communication technology. Now, Sarvodaya from the very beginning introduced appropriate technologies to village development. Although we had a very deep philosophy, holistic philosophy, we never rejected the modern science, which could be, which is affordable by people, which has proven to be effective, culturally appropriate. So consistently we have introduced, even solar technology we were the first to introduce through a microfinance system. Mobile technology, and some of the people who are working with our program are here, people like Joe, who have worked in our ICT program as a volunteer, know how even this smartphone technology is now making a huge difference in local communities. Young people have learned how to, have a Facebook account using the smartphone, and then putting the village products, some high quality products in the village, and then suddenly found markets for the village producers. I mean, it's amazing how technology can be very empowering. Then instead of credit-based growth, we like to have savings-led growth. Even a poor community, they can save. and we have demonstrated that our microfinance program had more than 2 billion rupees savings. Our whole program, 90% of our loans are given from the savings of rural communities. They have the potential. Those are not big savings, sometimes $10, $20 in their savings account. But when they get pooled, it's a huge amount. And that we believe that we can have a savings-led economic growth. So at the same time, our philosophy had been eradicate poverty, we address poverty, but also at the same time we try to reduce affluence. Unless we reduce affluence, unless we reduce our consumption, we can't eradicate poverty. So what does that mean at an individual level? Giving up wasteful styles of living. We all, I think, can make that contribution to the humanity by leading a simpler life. That doesn't mean that you have to rough out and live like a beggar. No, it's having a balanced life. And so in our communities, we never say that you shouldn't have a television. You should have all these basic needs, but don't go to the extreme. Because that will have a cost to other people. So you also try to share your wealth and other resources you have to meet the basic needs of other people. So even in a village you get rich people, we never leave them out. We try to bring them into the development process. They also come and work hand in hand with other people in the village. So you try to address those social differences as well. And also we try to remove the structural injustices that are there. Our constitution sometimes itself deprives certain communities of equal access. So you try to address those structural issues. Then we believe that sometimes these spiritual and cultural activities are regarded as uneconomical. It's not. We know that by having certain values preserved in communities, you prevent conflict. And by preventing conflict, you contribute to economic growth in a community. Just imagine what's happening in certain places like even Jerusalem now, very unfortunate how the violence is spreading. And in my own country 3 weeks ago, we had terrible riots with the Muslim community instigated by a very minute group of Buddhist monks. We are ashamed as Buddhists to see that kind of hatred being instigated by so-called Buddhist monks. We don't recognize them as monks, they are just thugs in robes, very unfortunate. So we try to promote these spiritual values. That doesn't mean it's fundamental religious activity. These are spiritual elements where shared humanity, shared values of any community. Then we try to ensure the savings circulate within the village. So these are some of the elements of this new alternative economic system, and it should not create a rich few, and it should not be just making profit at the cost of destroying the environment. We have a situation immediately after the war. There's a massive infrastructure development in the north and east of Sri Lanka, which is really good. But the thing is, the environmental impact has been very negative, and some of the forest reserves we have been, in the name of attracting tourism, without having any regard to the ecosystems. They have put up hotels without going through the normal environmental impact assessments. So that is very, very unfortunate. So we try to influence that type of economic development. So the holistic approach therefore is trying to satisfy basic needs, and it will not happen without developing new leaders. We need catalysts, we need change agents. So we have a very strong education program where we try to train these leaders, and also participatory democracy is very important. So those village organizations that I have described earlier, which emerge at the third stage of village development, is fundamental to this. So you have an independent and a representative community organization with a legal basis who can lead that change. So now we have even gone a step further by getting them to look at some of the governance issues. in their own locality. So they are taking up if there is a problem with the local government authorities. Now the several community organizations will get together, make a representation. Then reviewing the budgets of these local government authorities. How that allocation is happening. Now in United States you have a very good culture of local government and citizen engagement. We don't have the same culture. Our people don't go and sit and follow the proceedings of a council meeting. Now you sometimes, because it's allowed in the rules, and they don't even have the space or chairs reserved for the citizens to come and sit. So these organizations go and negotiate and say, no, you have to provide seating arrangements so that we can come and sit and listen to your proceedings. So that kind of new governance culture is emerging. Then this important part of this whole thing is capital formation. I have touched here. The normal capital formation is financial capital formation. But we have consistently articulated capital formation not just in economic or financial terms, but spiritual terms. How you build peace through inner meditation, inner transformation. Now we have many programs, peace meditations. Now last week we had a very big meditation program. In fact, it was also attended by some of the professors, clinical professors from United States, who have done research on meditation. And I think I just read the University of Medicine also had a research on meditation which was published, and it was really moving to see how how it has proven that it has a very beneficial impact on people's lives. So social capital, relationship building, which is very important, and which brings also ethnic harmony, particularly as a country which has been divided along ethnic lines. We have to have these the relationships re-established. And so this is the capital formation that's happening in the community. So we look at capital formation in a much more broad perspective. In order for our organization to itself to survive, we have these are just examples of some economic activities that we are doing. We produce school furniture and also educational toys. Some of the material we export to other countries, and this is one of the revenues. We get the village products also to a certain standard. Now we can't, earlier 20 years ago we can just export to say Europe, the standards were not there. Now say the paint that you use, these are all children's toys. You have to have non-toxic paint. Now those are the new compliance requirements we have. So we do that, and even the communities we produce, they understand that lead is poisonous. So there's an educational process, so they know the entire value chain until it reaches a household in wherever this product is being exported. So we have some products like that, and we also reach to young entrepreneurs. We have many programs to train young people in various trades, and we have our own printing establishment, printing educational material. So we also have some of our educational centers also bringing a revenue. So to conclude, we try to affect a change at 3 levels. One is at the level of consciousness. What we mean by consciousness is how we think about ourselves, our inner beings. So we believe that that's really important in the process of development, sustainable development. However, economy obviously is important. So how we meet our basic needs. So we have to have a system of economics that will serve the interests of people, and I have described that process that we are practicing. Then finally, the empowerment is really empowering the grassroots so that we have certain principles governing our behavior. So we have created institutions to address the level of consciousness. We are trying, actually, the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning is going to be it's the precursor for a Sarvodaya University. In Sri Lanka, we don't have, we are, by law, you can't have private universities. We only have state universities at the moment. So we are desperately trying to form a Sarvodaya University because we think that the world needs a different kind of higher education. So we named this institution Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning. Higher not just in terms of higher degrees, PhDs, masters, but deeper learning. That is the meaning. So we hope that we get the accreditation. Hopefully by next year, then we can have even much more formal relationships with universities like Wisconsin. And then we have specialized institutions dealing with the economic aspect of our movement. We still don't have our own development bank, but we have a finance company, and that is doing development financing, because we had to come under government regulation because we don't have microfinance regulation in Sri Lanka. So we converted our microfinance program into a regulated finance company, and then we also have two programs. They show there is the National Reawakening program, where we particularly look at governance issues, and the Sarvodaya Legal Services Movement, doing all kinds of legal literacy programs, human rights education, and so on. I'll not go into details, but we have these 12 institutions which are functioning in coordination to really bring the movement to the next level. So particularly the technology program Fusion, the Sarvodaya ICT for Development program, trying to adopt communication technology. Then we also are moving into more a model of social entrepreneurship, where certain programs which were dependent on donor funding have now been converted into actually profit-making entities. We make a profit, but not profit sharing by individuals. It's all going into the charitable part of the organization. So these are some of the experiments that we are doing. So in the future, we hope that we will be shifting totally from donor-dependent programs to completely independent financing for our program. So we try to link new developments such as this communication technology to village economic setup, like farmer products being made available through the net. So there are some research programs also. So these are some of the experiments that we are doing, and my own involvement is very much in the future will be on the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning, and we believe that these higher learning institutions around the world who have a very different philosophy, who understands the threat that we have, climate change, all these, I think our rulers, the leaders, political leaders are still not fully aware of what is happening in this world. It's a very dangerous situation. So we need to have that education as a prime driver of this social transformation. So that is the very reason that we are also very keen to link with the higher education institutes. Therefore, I am very happy that I am able to come here and connect with the University of Wisconsin, particularly the Global Health Institute, and we really look forward to having the students. And I think on the 20th, from 20th onwards, we are having another group from UW, and we really look forward because it's a mutual learning. The students also learn from communities, but the communities also really learn something from these students, and then see the interconnectedness. We have a lot to do, and I think there's a lot of potential for us to work together. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. And I'm interested in some of the villages in which you've worked. How does this program interface with the local government?
In Sri Lanka, we have the country is divided into 25 administrative districts. Then each district is subdivided into smaller units called the divisions, and each division then is subdivided again into smaller units of 200, maybe 100 to 200 families. So the local government unit is at a little higher level, a population about 20 to 30,000. So Now, what happens is that in the local government division, it will have about 200 to 300 villages, so it's quite a large number. Now, we may not have a presence in the whole of that division, although we cover about 1/2 to 2/3 of the villages in Sri Lanka, but really active societies where the officials can go and negotiate with the local government, we don't have a big number. So we have formed a divisional level council representative of those village society members and elected officials. So it is a parallel governing body, completely voluntary, and not only the Sarvodaya members are present, but also retired government officials, any individual who has a social mind and interest. So this is a recent development. Last 3 years we formed these councils called Deshodaya or National Reawakening Councils. Then they link, and we have trained them. We got under a special program during the last 3 years, we got them trained on advocacy, how and the basic local government legislation, the citizens' rights, how you can negotiate. So they were prepared to go and negotiate. So most of these councils were then linked with these communities that way. And then now they are in a position to bring up certain issues. Sometimes they have taken up alcohol or drug abuse in the area. Some other when there's some tension in mixed racial areas, they intervene. They have formed interreligious councils. So they have been very effective. But this is a new thing. It's still we don't have I don't have very many success stories as yet. But we have just started and we see a lot of potential, and that's the way forward for us now. Unlike those days where we will be helping a community to implement a project, now it is really empowering these communities to be able to connect with local government. Yes?
I'm wondering how, as a Buddhist-inspired organization whose ethos comes from things like the Brahma Viharas and the Sigalovada Sutta,
Yeah.
how you interact with ethnic communities who don't identify as Buddhist and who might be hesitant to participate with a Buddhist identity as a result of things like the Civil War or those thugs and robes, the
Right.
Balasena.
Yeah, actually, the philosophy now, though I sort of presented it that way, we were working with all communities from the very beginning, from 1960s, even the Tamil and Muslim communities in the north and the east. So the approach was really sharing and working together. We never sort of brought the Buddhist label into the work that we were doing. And even when if you leave out the sort of identity, these are common values shared by communities. Even in the Tamil community, working together is part of their culture. It has been there. So we try to revive that. And also the Tamil community in particular identified with the Gandhian philosophy. So they were able to look at some of the concepts of ahimsa and selfless sacrifice, all those things. So Sarvodaya was able to interpret those principles in a very neutral way. And from the very beginning, we had workers who belong to that community. We never had a policy where we recruit and plant people from another community in a very far away community in the northern or eastern part. So we build the leaders from those areas. So for them, it's their own movement. If you go to Sri Lanka now, about 30-40% of our staff are non-Buddhists, non-Sinhalese. And they will fight and fight not in violence, but they will die for this movement. They will feel that it's their movement. So but the large majority of the people, of course, are Buddhist. So that also helped in the reconciliation. So at a time when Buddhism is being interpreted in a very different way, when we are able to bring people together, then they accept, and that way we were able to portray the kind of unifying nature of Buddhism, the true character of Buddhism as an inclusive philosophy.
did mention the importance of leadership development.
Yes.
Can you talk more or provide detail of what that looks like and how you're doing that?
Yes. We have structured training programs. We have, say, like 2 weeks leadership training programs. It's initially it was residential, but now we have modified in the villages where we work, how to mobilize a community. So it's a structured training program in one of the training centers based on a curriculum, and it has a practical part also where they'll be required to go and study a community as a group, about 15 to 20 group of trainees, and then so then they go back to their own villages and work in the village. So that's one type. Then we have more subject-specific training, preschool teachers training, which is accredited now by the government. So those after the preschool, what we call early child development and care, ECCD, that course they get a diploma and they can either work in as preschool teachers in their own villages or in another village, and then ranging from specialized say programs or savings and credit, how to run a microfinance program, to vocational training. Vocational training, we follow the government accreditation system. So some of the centers have to be registered and they have to have facilities at a certain level to be able to offer these courses. So it ranges from the needs. So what happens is that in a given district, our coordinator will identify the training needs and say that we need leadership training for so many number of youth from this village. We need this type of trainings, and then we try to match with our available resources and organize those programs. That's how it's done. Yes, please.
I'm interested in your initial interface with some of the villages, because in your 5-stage model, you begin stages 1 and 2 with psychological and social infrastructure development, and then you get to what I guess that's part of my question, the basic human needs.
Yeah.
It seems that stage 3 has to do with strengthening institutions to ensure the future of basic human needs, but when you go into an impoverished village, before you can start those other sort of developments, are you making sure that an impoverished village has its basic needs before they can start the next process, like even stage 1?
Actually, the first 2 stages also, this mobilization and the psychological transformation doesn't happen in isolation in terms of just education. It's always a practical thing. So you start identifying a need in the village which can be fulfilled by collective action. So it can be a road construction or a preschool or something. So at that initial stage itself, you start with the basic need that the community has. It may be clean water, something like that. So, but it happens in a systematic way after you have a community organization, where then they are able to do a kind of a mapping and assessment. Say how many, say if there are 100 families, how many don't have permanent, proper permanent housing or toilets, water supply. So those are the basic needs that they identify, and then say, okay, on a priority basis, how can we work towards getting the most affected initially, organize ourselves with our resources. Then we also help them to get resources from outside. So the basic need satisfaction happens hand in hand with institutional building. It goes parallelly, and we have been quite successful in doing that. And now with all these external support drying up, what we are doing is identifying the available government resources that can be linked. For example, earlier in the 1980s, early 1980s and late 1970s, we were the largest provider of rural water supply in Sri Lanka. But later in the 1990s, the government got a lot of money from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank to provide rural water supply. They had a separate department created. So what we did was, when you have a community organization, they have already done the assessment how many families don't have access to safe drinking water. We help them to prepare a project proposal and then link with the relevant government department, so that they can obtain the assistance to fulfill that. But in order for that to happen, they need good leadership developed and the organization. So it goes hand in hand.
Great. And, sorry.
Yeah, please.
So at the very outset, there, does Sampradaya come in with supplies to build the road and with some food and some basic funding?
Yes, but we try to actually, even at the initial stage, collect something from the village. So they will say, okay, we will donate so many sacks of rice, and somebody will say, okay, I'll contribute with some vegetables or something like that. So there is always a local contribution, mostly local contribution, and of course we also bring some resources from outside, and sometimes we even bring volunteers from other villages and contribute to that process.
Thank you.
Yes.
Somewhat related to that, you talked about the village development changes and stages, and
Yes.
there's the social infrastructure groups
Yes.
that are created. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, actually it is, now we have mothers group. That's a very strong group that we try to promote. Initially, there are children's programs that happen in the second stage of village development. One of the first programs that we initiate is early childhood development program. So the mothers get together, and because their children go to these preschools. By the way, now all these things that I'm describing are changing now with demography. Now, at the time when we started our preschool program, the family size was 5 in Sri Lanka. And now it has come down to 2 children. Earlier it was 5 children. So now there are preschools which are not feasible to be run because there are only less than 10 children in the village. What do? Then you have to have a cluster of villages. So these are problems. But so what you do is you get these mothers together, and then they take a leadership role in deciding who is going to be trained as the preschool teacher, and they will monitor the functioning of the preschool, and they will identify special needs of children. Now sometimes we have social taboos for disabled children. Now there are a lot of potential, even children with Down syndrome. Those children are often kept inside the house. So by going through these organized groups, you can identify their issues specific to them. Same with youth, and youth groups are also very effective, and we get them to also participate in various voluntary activities, like when there are big religious functions happening, they go with a uniform and contribute to first aid and all kinds of things. So those group formation is very vital to that initial mobilization process. But of course, depending on the time availability. Now earlier, there wasn't that kind of economic pressure. Now young people, can't volunteer that much. So, but whoever is available, they form into groups. But then the village society is the one ultimately which is really responsible as an institution for doing the development work in the village.
I have one
Yes.
last question then,
Yeah.
regarding funding, because I know you
Yeah.
said that the funding is decreasing, and then
Yeah.
you're relying more on some of the enterprise support.
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
talk about some of those
Yeah.
enterprises?
Yeah, actually now we have 3 alternative sources of funding that we are now trying to develop. One is those enterprises. So we had a commercial printing business. Unfortunately, we ran into problems, and it's now running as a smaller entity. It's not producing a lot of revenue. But this export business that we have initiated, we are linked to this fair trade, fair trade business. So we are trying to expand on that. Unfortunately, we did it so well that we were getting about something like 10 million rupees. That's about $100,000 a year, a net contribution to the movement's activities. It peaked in 2006, but in 2008, when there was the financial crisis, our biggest market was North America, USA and Canada, and Europe. It just crashed. So it was very unfortunate, but we are now again it's picking up. So that export business is also, I think there's a lot of potential, because now there's a tendency even in this children's toys, not this cheap plastic stuff from China. Now they like to have wooden stuff, good quality ones. So I think that market is there, so we want to expand on that. Then we also have, some new enterprises, we are even thinking of going into some community tourism. Now with our infrastructure, we do those programs in an informal way, but in a much more structured way can we market really these community tourism. We are a country which has a rich sort of, there are historical places and biodiversity hotspots are there. So that's another area that we are looking at now. And then we also have a lot of facilities. We have training facilities, residential facilities, which are given out to other organizations. So we are looking at improving those facilities and bringing a revenue. Then thirdly, we have set up an endowment fund, but it's still very small because the donors don't give for endowments that easily. So we try to expand that endowment fund. So those are the three areas that we are looking at to keep the organization going, the core structure. Because I think in the next 2-3 years time, there won't be big grants coming from any donor. We'll keep on looking for those, but try to build our own income generation, income sources, so that we can keep the core structure intact and then help the communities to directly access services from the government. And of course, we also have the microfinance program, and if that is also making profitable, it can also contribute to the organization. So we want to form someday a development bank. So it's a difficult time, but I think we'll get there. So then, thank you very much. And,